Algebra 2, Section 1-3. We're going to run through just many examples. There really are no notes to speak of, just 6 examples. We're going to start in on equation solving. This is definitely something that you did in Algebra 1. In fact, you will find that the first few chapters of the Algebra 2 book are really just like Algebra 1 on fast forward. So we actually spent a chapter or so in Algebra 1 solving equations, and we kind of just tackle all that here in one section. So here goes. Hopefully you remember that what you want to do is get the variable by itself. A lot of times what I say in class is identify what's happening to your variable and then undo things in reverse order, as if to say reverse PEMDAS order, or reverse, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or whichever one you use. In the case of here in example 1, first of all, what we would have to do is get the variables together, get all the variables on one side of the equation, and then do what I just said. So most people would choose to subtract 2x from both sides, and that's what I'll show here. Just subtract 2x from both sides. What I show a step like that in red, that's really not something that you have to show, but just so that you know what I'm doing there, I'm subtracting this 2x from both sides to get the x away from the right side of the equation. Whatever you do to the right side, you have to do to the left. That's the one of the cardinal rules of equation solving. So this would be 5x plus 3 equals negative 12. Then what you would do is subtract 3 from both sides. Again, you do not really need to show that step, and most of the time I don't. I'm just doing it here on the first step. That would then leave us with just 5x on the left. Negative 12 minus 3, always be extra careful with the negatives, and that would be negative 15. And then again, asking myself what's happening to the variable, it's being multiplied by 5, so I need to undo that by dividing by 5, or some teachers would tell you to multiply by the reciprocal of 5, which would be 1/5. Same result, and we'll get a final answer then with x on the left. Negative 15 divided by 5 is negative 3. Okay, and we believe that x equals negative 3 is the answer. If we wanted to be sure of that, we can always check it by plugging negative 3 back into the original equation. I'm not going to show that work, but I'll just show you their work when it comes to them checking it. It's very important that when you do check, so this right here is kind of the line that you'd want to see if we were checking. And I like the equal sign with a question mark, like we're wondering if these actually are equal. Okay, we did the math on the left and right, came out to the same number. So yes, they are equal. Our number, our answer, it checks. And again, one thing to keep in mind, and this will be more important as we go through the year, is you want to check it back into the original equation. You don't want to check it in your work after you're halfway done with the problem. I wouldn't want to check it in line 3 or even line 3 or line 2. You want to check it back in the original. The problem they gave us. You plug negative 3 in for x for both, came out to negative 18. Here, hopefully you know that you would distribute to get rid of parentheses. So this would make this 4m plus 36 equals negative 3m plus 12. And then it's much like the problem that we just previously did. So I'm going to roll to the answer here. You would add 3m to both sides. It wouldn't be wrong to say subtract 4m from both sides, or subtract 36 from both sides, or subtract 12 from both sides. All of those would be acceptable first steps. But most of the time, what I find most people to do is to get the variables together first, and if possible, they'll keep the coefficient of the variable positive. So that's why probably the majority of the class would choose to add 3m to both sides as their next step. That's exactly what they did on that step there. And then on this last step, what they have done is divided by 7. Okay, and don't reach for your calculator to get a decimal unless our directions specifically say round to the nearest. It's perfectly fine to leave it as a fraction like you see here. M equals negative 24/7 is a great answer. Don't change it to decimal unless we specifically say round to the nearest tenth, round to the nearest hundredth, whatever. It should be a reduced fraction. If your answer comes out to 10/6, go ahead and reduce that to 5/3, but leave it as a fraction. This one says for us to take the formula here. This is a geometry formula for surface area, and to solve it for W. Now I can think of 2 approaches here. Let me kind of roll to their answer, and then I'll show you a different approach. What they've done from one step to the next here is just distributed the 2, and then they have subtracted that term, this one here, that is that doesn't have a W in it, right? So they basically subtracted this from both sides, leaving you with just a W, just the two terms that have a W in it. Now the next step is kind of the critical step, and that is that they're going to actually divide out the W. This would have been known as factoring or monomial factoring in your Algebra 1 class. Since both of these are, we want to say terms that are that have a W in them, you can divide that W out. So that's what they'll do on this step. Notice that what is left is 2L because W has been divided out, plus 2H because this W has been divided out, and it's in itself a quantity because it's in parentheses, and W is then now on the outside. The best way to convince you of that, if you're a little bit skeptical of what that step is to think about it in reverse. What would happen if you multiplied the W back in? Multiply the W back in, you'd have 2LW. That's what you have here. If you multiply the W here, you'd have 2WH or HW. The specific order is not important because of certain properties that we have in algebra. Anyway, the final step then, because we're trying to get W by itself then, would be to divide by this, 2L plus 2H. And you don't really need to put parentheses around it. If it helps you to put parentheses around it, that's fine. Believe it or not, when you divide by 2L plus 2H, that's a quantity, and this cancels with this. And then you can just divide the other side by the same thing. I'll show you their answer. And that may look like a pretty complicated answer, but that's what you'd had to do to get W by itself. Now, I'm going to take a different approach. So this is a perfectly good answer. I'm going to take a different approach just to maybe open your eyes to something. And that is that, did you know that you can divide both sides by 2 on this step? You can. And when you do that, you would have just A over 2 on the left. If you divide both sides by 2, you just have A over 2 on the left, and the parentheses can now be gone on the right. And what are we trying to get? We're trying to get W by itself. So it's going to follow a similar path from here, like the software showed a minute ago. And we'll subtract this LH from both sides. That would make this left side A over 2 minus LH. And then what's left is LW plus WH. So once again, I have two terms that have W in them, and I can divide them out. So this left side stays the same. As we go through the step of monomial factoring, the monomial factor that can come out of both of these is, in fact, W. W would be multiplied then by L plus H. And when I showed you their way to do it, they had the W on the right side of the parentheses. I kind of prefer it on the left side, but it's the same thing. Okay? And then finally, what I would do is divide by this quantity L plus H. Remember, the 2's gone, but it's still L plus H. And when you do that, now think about this. When you divide A over 2 by L plus H, what that's going to be is A over 2 times L plus H. When you divide a fraction, it's like multiplying the denominator by that thing that you're multiplying. Minus, right, this is the same minus sign, LH is getting divided by L plus H. And again, if you want parentheses here, you can have them. They are not necessary because a fraction bar is a grouping symbol, so you can leave them off or you can include them if it helps you. And that's it. Because when we divided by L plus H, it's now gone off this side. W is by itself. So it's a very different answer, I realize, a very different looking answer, I realize, but it actually is equivalent to the one you got. And that's kind of an important point to make too. Do you understand that what they gave us, this area formula, is the same, it's equivalent to this line, which is equivalent to this line, which is equivalent here, which is equivalent to the answer we got. And these are all equivalent to all of the lines, including the answer to the approach that they took. This is the nature of an equation. The one they gave us is best because usually what we're doing is finding an area, but that's not what they asked us to do on this one. They asked us to find the width. All right, moving on. This one says solve the certain equation or solve it for x, and then notice that it says find any restrictions on A and B. I'll talk about the restrictions after we solve, and what we're going to do is first subtract 8 from both sides. So x over a is equal to b minus 8 if I subtract 8 from both sides. Remember, ask yourself what's happening to the variable, then undo things in reverse order. My variable is being divided by a and then added to 8. My variable, because they said to solve for x, that variable is being divided by, then added to 8. So I subtract 8, and now I'm going to now I'm going to multiply by a. Multiply both sides of this by a. That would get x by itself. And you could write it like this: a times b minus 8, or you could distribute that a, which would probably be preferable, ab minus 8a. Now here's the thing. When they ask for restrictions, you need to include them. If we don't ask for restrictions, then that's that's a concept that's testing you on something different, and you don't have to include restrictions. But when we specifically say it in the directions and on the test, that's what we're going to do. You need to include them, and what they're looking for is a denominator of 0. You should know that you can't divide by 0, so we need to exclude any answers that would cause the denominator to be 0. And I don't just mean the answer that like your final answer, but if it's in the problem, if it's in any part of your work, or if it's in your final solution, we need to exclude that. So looking at the problem, we had a fraction that had an a as the denominator. That can't be 0. So as part of our answer, we want to say a not equal to 0. Okay, now one other thing. I'm just going to make something up. Let's suppose you came up with an answer that was x equals 27 over m minus n. Okay, you did a similar problem, and this is the answer you got. And again, it doesn't have to be the answer, but I'm just using that as an example. Well, what some students, based on what I just said here, what some students would say was, okay, m not equal to 0 and n not equal to 0. And that would be an instance of that being correct, right? Because 0 minus 0 is 0. But is that the only set for m and n that would cause the denominator to be 0? In fact, what it would be is they should not be the same thing, right? What if m is 1 and n is 1? What if m is 13 and n is 13? 13 minus 13 is 0. So really what we want is m not equal to n would be the correct way to say that. Okay, moving on, we just have 2 more. Adrian will use part of a garage wall as one of the long sides of a rectangular rabbit pen. He wants the pen to be 3 times as long as it is wide. He plans to use 68 feet of fencing. Find the dimensions. Because that's probably how you are going to make your rabbit pen, right? You're going to be like, I don't know how big this pen's going to be, but whatever it is, it's got to be 3 times as long as it is wide. Anyway, I'm going to make a quick drawing of that. If you didn't laugh at that, you don't find me funny, because that's my best joke. So we have house, and then we have the pen like this. And they told us that it's 3 times as long as it is wide. So if I let this be the width, obviously this would be the width as well. And this would have to be 3 times the width. And then we don't need any to go along the house. So it's just the 3 sides. So W plus 3W plus W, however you want to show those, or if you are good enough to just go ahead and combine like terms, I think that would be okay to just call that 5W equals 68. 5W equals 68. Okay, and let me just roll to the answer here. You would divide both sides by 5, and that would get you the width, 13 3/5. If you multiply that by 3, that'll get you the length. And just to double check, twice the width plus the length. This is L, right? L for length. And those would be in feet, I believe. Didn't they say feet? Yep. Well, I got a different check there. You can read through that if you want to. We want to end this video pretty quick here, so let's just do one more. It says the sides of a quadrilateral are in the ratio 1 to 2 to 3 to 6. Now let's stop and just talk about that for just a moment. Something else that would be in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 3 to 6 would be like 2 to 4 to 6 to 12, right? And if you read the rest of the problem, the perimeter is 138 centimeters. If these 4 numbers actually added up to 138, or for that matter, if 1, 2, 3, and 6 added up to the perimeter that they gave us, well, that would be the answer, right? But in fact, 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 12 does not add up to 138. So here's what we do to figure out what that, basically what that multiplier is. They actually kind of gave it away in their picture here, is you would do 1x plus 2x plus 3x plus 6x. right? We're going to figure out what x is, and then we can come back and figure out what all the actual lengths are. Those are going to add up to 138. These last two problems, there's a value in you being able to interpret a situation and make an equation out of it, and now we just want to solve our equation. So that would be 12x, right, is equal to 138. And then if you would divide 138 by 12, remember you're dividing both sides by 12, that is going to give us 11.5. It turns out that x is 11.5, which means that this side is 11.5. That would make the one that's twice 23. That would make the one that's 3 times, wouldn't that be 34.5? And the one that's 6 times is 69. And let me just double check with my calculator to make sure I got all those right. I'm adding 11.5 plus 23 plus 34.5 plus 69, and they should come out to 138, and they do. Okay, so they did ask us to find all the lengths. Make sure you answer the question they're asking, and we did that, and these are they. All right, thanks for tuning in.